see, we did a breeder series. I got two of these. We got Josh and Kelly coming in. We had, it's just to interview myself. I did a breeder series a number of years ago, and I had this revelation that most of the people I knew that were breeders were going to get knocked right out of existence because California was going to force you to have a nursery in order to produce seed. And for most of the regions, in order to have a nursery, you have to have industrial commercial property. And so all of a sudden, cannabis became not just your skills, but your zoning and your real estate acquisitions. And I saw all these killer breeders that I knew, that I used all their material for years. And I really respected them. And I was like, man, nobody really understands the value of these people. And so people look to me as like the source of all this genetic material, but I'm not inventing it. I'm deriving it from other people too. And so I wanted to highlight all the people that I worked with all these years. And I had an ability at the time financially to cover all of it. So I could afford to get the camera crews in and create the interview series. And then Shango sponsored it. And so what it did was it allowed us to be able to highlight people that I thought needed coverage in a way that they typically couldn't get covered. And I turned down a lot of people who wanted to be part of it because I didn't think they were really ethical. And they didn't represent what I wanted to see move forward. And because I was paying for it, I had that option. So when you pay the bills, you can kind of control what takes place. And the individuals I brought in, a lot of them had very little stage experience. So they were scared to death to get on the mic. And so what I did is I said, listen, let me bring you on stage, and then let's just have a discussion, and we'll just talk about what you do and what drives you, because what I want the public to see is your motivation and your direction. And that's what matters. It's not about marketing your products. It's about exposing yourself so that people can see the creativity that comes from you and why people should want to see your products. And since you don't have to justify it, you can just sit here in conversational sense. And it was a success beyond any dream I'd had of success in terms of how it impacted those people. And so a tremendous number of those individuals were able to get recognition. It allowed them to get access to people who needed them to come in and work with them in conjunction so they could then get a place to actually do their work. It created a demand for their seed stock that let the public realize I might want to play with that because they had made this emotional connection with them over the internet by seeing the interview. And it was just a tremendously powerful situation. And I was like, man, I was so grateful I did it. And then, we get into new cannabis, and all of a sudden we're all poor because we're spending all our money on heavy permit levels. And I was just like, man, I couldn't afford to go and sponsor a whole new series. But I realized that it wasn't the camera quality or the mic quality or any of those things that made it what it was. It was the people quality. And so when Josh asked me to come in and talk about genetics and markets, he said, hey, could you do some breeder interviews? And we try to talk about, just breeding in general. And we were able to gather people from Canada that were local. We were able to gather people from Humboldt, Northern California local. We were able to do New England local. And then we tried to get the Michigan locals. And it's a little tougher the more you go into the states that are just coming out, because a lot of the people are a little afraid to reveal themselves. And a lot of times the people underestimate their value. And so what happens is they're like, well, I just chuck pollen, and but I just chuck pollen. So what's the difference? What's really the difference? And what I wanted to do was be able to highlight some individuals in the area. So we had a whole bunch of people that we contacted, and a bunch of us responded back. But I don't know any of them because I'm not Michigan crew. So let's find out how many of them actually showed up today. But the point of it is we'll have some discussions about, and Kelly and Josh can come and talk about how they work with the ethical breeding. And hopefully we can grab, I know there's a couple people in there we can talk about that does local breeding, and they can kind of just talk about their story of what's driving them in the area they're doing and what issues they face. And it lets all of you kind of see these commonalities, which is important, because it starts to really identify the sameness, where you start to see each other on a different level of connectivity. And because of that, it makes you realize that none of you are that far behind or that far ahead. And I think that that's what's important, is to be able to see these pieces in play and be able to get an opportunity to understand position in time There's a curve I keep drawing for people here that I stole it from the tech industry when I was trying to research cannabis about how is the cannabis world going to change. So I took a look at other industries and their explosive rate of increase, their peak, their precipitous decline once you have overproduction from too many people, the price collapse. There's this cleansing at the bottom where all those that can't stay liquid disappear. The prices bounce back up because the production is now balanced, and then you set a mean price that stays basically the same for time except for outliers that are a little below it or some that are higher, like we talked about that high dollar bourbon model, where there's people that are selling multiple $1,000 bottles of booze, the neighbor's only selling them for 50, you're selling them for 2,000, but you're still selling the same kind of booze basically, but just a little bit more refinement. And so that curve kind of illustrates it. And when you see these curves, it lets you figure out where on the curve are you actually, so that you can understand, I got you, here I'm entering, I can expect to see this. And when you start to see your position on these curves, it lets you realize we have time or we've run out of time. And the run out of time is now, how do you survive the collapse and come out? And if you have time, it's how do you build enough infrastructure while there's potential. There's potential profit, there's a potential speed, so that you can build the things you need so that when you collapse and come back up out of it, you already have everything and your overall costs are less, so you're not having to carry such a leveraged amount. And looking at the picture on a bigger level is that the breeders that we work with, those of you that are more dedicated than others, where you know people who have a good direction, you believe that they're good at what they do, these are the people that you start to work with, developing the lines you're going to work with in your regions. And so you have to work with them on selection process, and you have to work with them on giving them the ability to use some of your garden space to be able to have enough plant material to actually sift through to find outliers. And what takes place is that you start really having a development amongst all of you that works pretty good. And so let's see if we can find some of the people that were going to come in. I had a bunch of them too, man. I had like 7 or 8 cats that hit me up, and we sent them all into Josh. And I laughed because I had the same thing in Maine too, where a couple cats came in, and I saw them come in the building, and then I saw them run out and get in their cars and drive away. And I was laughing, and I said, the terror. And, well, you know, it's exposure. But the main point is that what you're trying to realize is that the roles of all the individuals are important. And for a lot of people, the ability just to be on a stage and to talk about what they do, it's empowering. And it allows you to be able to just tell your story, and you're not trying to boast, and you're not bragging, you're just really explaining, hey, this is who I am, and this is what I do, and this is what drives me. And so if we don't pull anybody up, man, there's any of you that throw pollen on stuff, come on up and chop it up with me. And I'm not going to expose you like where I'm Mike Wallace on 60 Minutes. And what it'll do is it'll allow us to have a conversation, because then people can hear your story and they can throw questions, and I can kind of moderate them out. So Josh and Kelly from Dragonfly are going to come up, and we're going to blast on it for a while. But if any of you, want and I did the same thing in Maine too, and in Humboldt, where I'm like, listen, I know you're good, and I know you're about it, and I know that you're very juvenile in what you do, but you're the perfect person to showcase the inception of the craft. And so once we start this with Josh and Kel, then any of you that want to come up and chop, it's cool. You don't have to. You don't have to hold the mic the whole time. So what it is we got questions, and you can talk about what you're doing and your desires, where you're choosing your stock from, why you chose it, what you'd like to see take place, what are the factors that you have to take into account in your area, your zones, and how do you approach it. So that's really the basis of it. The breeder interviews were always made for the breeder. It wasn't about me. I had all my licenses. I knew I was going to move forward. I had all this resources. But I was tripping because I realized all these people that I thought were really gifted at what they did, they weren't going to get any credit. And with breeding, it's always these incredible breeders that you see, but I'm telling you, some of the nastiest stock I've ever touched has been coming out of people who ran a 10-pack in their closet. Because that's the beauty of genetics, that there's always an outlier. You never know where it's going to come from. You never know who's going to find it. And if you take a look at chem lines out of a single little bag of seeds, out of a bag of grass, he launches a revolution. You look at the cookie, you look at the white, you look at the UK cheese. These are all varietals out of seed packs that somebody found that absolutely create perp. these things that people found them and they launch out, and then there's people that say they created it and bred it, but whoever released it first found that seed in some form. There was no massive process. And I think that's important to realize, because what it does, it makes you understand that you're all in your own process of selecting, creating, and growing. You're all able really to discover something that's supernatural. And if you can get it into the hands of the other farmers, then it starts to really resonate in production quantities to make it work. And for guys like me that are nursery operators, what my responsibility was to go through people's seed lines and to select products that I thought represented what the breeder wanted to showcase. So I asked the breeder, when you bred this, what were you looking for? And then they'd let me smoke the parental stock and say, what I wanted, Kev, was I wanted some of this and some of that, but more in a little separation. So I wanted it a little more fruity in here and a little more gassy here. And I wanted that high to be kind of resonating. And I was like, I got you. So I would go through the seed forms, because I can access it from the breeder direct, and I would look for what they were seeking. And then I'd find that, and I'd say, hey, is this what you want to represent your seed line? And they'd be like, totally, that's exactly what I was looking for. Now I can take that, and I can put that on the market, and I can give the breeder credit. So I can say it's Breeder Bill's cut of, OG dog. And what it does is it allows people now to get a clone of a product and run it, try it, enjoy it, and then say, hey, I'd like to go get seeds from Breeder Bill. And as long as you, as participants in this thing, you don't screw the person who puts the genetic package together, what you end up doing is cultivating people who continue to paint pictures that you probably can't. Their directions might not be yours, and most of the time you don't want them to be yours, or otherwise you'd bottleneck the creativity. So if you have 20 people that are creative, it gives you 20 different directions, and as the market moves, you're able to move with it. As needs and desires change, you can move with it. And so for me as a nursery provider, what was always important was to give the credit to the people involved. And then as a dispensary owner, I was able to give store space to new upcoming breeders. So instead of trying to focus on larger companies, I focused on smaller craft breeders from the very beginning. And it allowed me to be somebody who helped develop a seed industry in my area. And eventually I became the largest seed dealer in all of Northern California, which is not a small market. And it was all created by this. It was created by helping people that were breeders, by getting them stock that they needed, by putting breeders in touch with other breeders so they could do collaborative projects, by taking stock from breeders that I either sifted or they brought me that they wanted to use as a representation of their line. And you put that into the market, and as long as you give them credit so that they're able to receive the benefit of what they've done, you're able to take these people and highlight the work, drive them forward, and you ride right along with them. And so it's an incredible relationship you have when you have it with the genetic freaks of the game, where all they really see is a direction they want to chase and follow. And I don't think that very few industries have that type of creativity in that same way that's worked for us in cannabis. But you got to realize that some of you that have stores, some of you that are farmers, some of you who are going to be nursery operators, whatever the licensing lays out over time, you all have this ability to further each other's agenda by not screwing each other over on the credit. And so there's no shame in saying you didn't create it. There's no shame in saying you didn't make it. And you have to allow the people who do this that platform, and their success then resonates, and it also validates you as a selector, as a business developer, as somebody who's furthering things. And so when you're choosing people that are solid and you make them move forward in life, you get credit for that too in a roundabout way that most definitely benefits you, because other people then who are cautious see that you have been cultivating success for others, and that nobody is complaining that they got robbed or screwed. And what happens now is that you're able to cultivate new relationships with people. And I think that the problem with cannabis in a real way is that so many people that got into cannabis were empowered financially, and it allowed them to get out of the mainstream life because they didn't feel comfortable there. They didn't feel confident in conflict. They didn't like bullshit. What they wanted was a quality of life, and they go into cannabis and they find it, and with their little small group they can maintain it. But as they go forward, they're scared to death to move into the new economy because they have no trust and faith. And so what you have to do is you have to be that person that creates trust and faith. You need to be somebody who is blowing a hole in the game so that others can pour through the door, so that when the door shuts, there's more than just you in the room. And if you can remember that, then what you can do is you can absolutely build an industry that's incredible, because we really created a tremendous amount of stuff together. And as I look back at it, I'm like, wow, it was some instrumental things that we did in the course of an industry by really just trying to be ethical in a way that I don't need anybody to tell me to be. And almost all of you know how to behave pretty well. And if you can remember that, then what you're doing is you're creating an image that the customers see. You're creating an image that other industries see. And it gives you a level of respect that you don't really understand because you're still coming out of the woodwork into the norm. Once you come into the norm and you deal with some of these larger companies, you're going to find that your methodologies of building and creating and stabilizing and helping to generate an industry are powerful. And that's the respect that you get from the industrialists. They realize that mentally you are on the level. And now they treat you a little different, and they give you an opportunity to actually collaborate with them, because you ultimately aren't brutal enemies in the game. It's business to them, it's craft and life to us, but on the business end of it, you can communicate and collaborate. And that ability is incredible because it always helps you understand perspective of how they view the business, how they view the future, and you can find that common ground where you view the future. And then you can take a look and say, hey, are we calibrated correctly? Are we actually moving in the right direction? And the more that you can cultivate and develop these smaller operators who are doing things that are niche, the greater chance you have to preserve your diversification. Because if you're developing people that have very unique things and you're allowing them to have faith and trust in you to where you're able to access the material, you're able to produce the material, you're financially successful. And you need that. You need the ability to see through this problem on a very collaborative way. And I meet brilliant people all the time, but nobody's so smart they're by themselves. So with that, let's get somebody on the stage and let's come up and chop up some seeds. And like I said, anybody who wants to come up and just blast on doing some breed work, come on and just chop it up, man. You don't have to be supersonic. It's important if you just want to get your word out. And there's no expose. I won't reveal where your house is, and I won't make you tell your real name. All right? Come on up. He was asking, I'm new to breeding, and I'd like to understand better how one works on stabilization. Right? Okay.
And you can add to this or whatever. Yeah, I mean, the idea of stabilization is generally before was to, go many cycles with a male and a female, each cycle taking from the new offspring, taking a male and female from each and doing that for 8 cycles, 7 to 8 cycles to get some stabilization between all your plants, so that when you started seeds that you were getting a congruent mix in your stock. And seed breeders, nowadays a lot of people are just doing F1s, and that's what it's called when it's the first season. And you're going to get variations within that first. There is going to be vigor and stuff in an F1. I think it's good to grow F1s, and you can find a lot of new variations within the strain, but it's, you're not going to have the same congruency within flavor and stature within the plant. So you could have some tall, some small, and stuff like that. So it's less common these days to find a truly stable strain, and it's pretty wild out there in the sense of seeds. And did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, there's in order to technically be an F1, I have to lay 2 inbred lines together to do that. And what we mean by inbred lines is lines that are definitively that thing. We don't really have that in cannabis. We haven't really worked those directions. Some people do. Some people have some really stable work where they've been breeding the same thing for a long time, and so they have a plan and a concept of what's going to come from the subsequent progeny. When we take those 2 dissimilar lines and we cross them, we get an F1. And what we get is we get a really good distribution evenly of these genes. And we usually get like a vigor infusion, because the more we inbreed something, the less we're cranking up the throttle. And so in cannabis, the problem is that you don't really have these inbred lines to work. And so when someone says, this is an F1, what they're saying is, I had a clone and I grabbed a male of unknown value and I threw it on top, and then I put it in a bag and sold it to you for $300 with a nice box. And that's some good business, but that is some shitty business, because what you're doing is you're disappointing people all the time, and every now and then somebody finds an outlier that's awesome, but it's not the way you want to go about it. And so over time, these groups in front of you, you will form your own true inbred lines, where you have stable lines that have a very specific trait that comes with it in a package, a set of qualities that you can quantify. And then you'll be able to take those inbred lines and roll them against other inbred lines within the region, so that you can start to combine flavors as trends change. It's in the F2 that you see the real freaks come out. And so if we had 2 inbred lines and we made our first cross, our first felial generation, we take the progeny of that felial generation and go against that. In that one is where you see a concentration of genetics, both good and bad. So you'll see the worst, and you'll see the best, and you'll see the middle. And when it comes to breeding, it's, are you looking to hunt phenotypes, which isn't bad, it means you're looking for outliers for clonal production, or are you looking to use the seed for production? If you're looking to use the seed for production, you don't look for outliers, you look for the mean. You look to see where the greatest aggregate of production is within it, because that's where the propensity, the genes have been deposited, most consistent. And you start to work those populations in that direction if you find quality that you seek. If you're looking for production cultivars, then it's the opposite. You look for these outlier freaks. But breeding with outlier freaks doesn't necessarily mean the progeny is going to be consistent at all, because if it was an outlier, it wouldn't be a freak or an outlier. It would be in the mean. And so you have to kind of make the decision on what are you seeking. Are you breeding these to look for clonal production so that you can have a very specific, say it's a chemotype. You have an unbelievably exotic plant that has this rare chemotype that has a cannabinoid that is valuable to you. Well, then you have to run clonal, and you find it in a line, you pull it out, you run it. But if it's not, you look for evenness. And like with CBD lines, people go, I'm doing CBD, but half the CBD stock I look at is coming out 22% THC, no CBD. The other one's 22% CBD, no THC. So how do you do that? It's hard. It's tough with CBD lines. Now, the hemp lines are a little different. But with CBD cultivars that we've worked in med, there's an incredible amount of variability within them. And so in those, you have to really look for outliers to use as production until we have the ability to work those lines. Hemp was different because there was an economic value to go do this, because it was a way through regulatory scheme that said, if I can get below this number, I can sell hemp even though it's pot, but we're calling it hemp. Well, that breeding methodology, they had a much higher level of scientific breeding. CBD in cannabis was very early quality, and then it diminished because hemp came in as a replacement, and nobody was making any money with CBD cannabis. So if you're not making any money, where's the incentive? So the people who had incentive were private people who were trying to seek chemotypes for benefit, but it's the same situation. You're in CBD lines, you're looking for outliers. You're in hemp lines, you're looking for stability. And so it's, what is your desire? And then, anybody questions? We got some people on the table here that are smart. Let's shoot some questions.
Do they sell male pollen? I mean, we always sell seeds and clones, but I never see anybody selling the male portion.
I don't think that's for sale.
I collect it from other growers.
It's definitely more of something that you get through other people that are breeding, and I think that a lot of people, will share their pollen with you. I rarely see it for sale. I mean, maybe it is for sale, he's saying. Strainly.com is someone saying you can buy it. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that's awesome.
Strainly's also the crew that comes up with some of these breeder rights documents. And they're just trying to create a place that allows people to function and operate, share technology, share genomic material, have an ability to learn how to protect the stock. A lot of times, you end up finding people you're working with that are doing seed work, and you say, hey, can you throw me some pollen? People are terrified of throwing males at people because males usually take a long time to find. But for me, like, I hunt really killer males up, and I share them all the time to people that want to be breeders. And so if you want to be a breeder and you're like, man, I want to be a breeder, I need a good male, I'll help you source one up. And what it does is it allows you to go chase it down the road, and you got to further the game. And then I get to access killer pollen back. And then we take the pollen, we put it into a plastic paper container that keeps it dry. We dry it. Then I throw it into a sealamine container, and I vacuum pack it. And then I just put it in the freezer. And then I can open up this package, pull out this pollen, warm it up, and then I could apply it through either brush or through inside a pollination bag. And it lets me have access when I want to go down the road. And so saving pollen is killer, because every now and then you'll get hold of a female plant at someone's spot, and then they'll say, listen, can I dust one of these lower branches? But it hasn't happened to the degree that we'd like to see. And I get asked for this all the time. And as we go forward, you'll see it. But the clonal material is so in demand now for the sameness that I think it really diminished seed production in the short term. And I believe as we go forward, you'll see that change as the market starts to realize that diversity within the varietal to a subtle degree is excellent, because you stop gaining, what's the word I'm looking for, where you become saturated on the cannabinoids and the terps you're receiving, and you start to get a muted high. And so smoking within a family of varieties that are pretty close, I think, is a lot better for you as a consumer, because you're always really having to smoke less.
I would also add to that people think it's, sorry, real quick, that that maybe fear doing breeding or using pollen because they're not used to it, or they're used to doing females. And I think that it's really pretty doable, and especially if you're just using a paintbrush or anything like that on a plant, and if you're careful and it's not windy. I mean, if you take some precautions like that, it's amazing how doable it is, and how you can do individual branches. But Shango.
A quick comment, and then my question. First, all the speakers this weekend have been pushing essentially community, right? For all you guys get together and do stuff. And I just wanted to point out that on Vashon Island, where I live, the organization Vimea, I wasn't allowed to grow females at my house. And so, I grew them elsewhere, but not at my house. And so we set up the Vimea male library at my house. And so when people were popping seeds of like killer genetics and they got a male, well, they didn't want to run them, right? But they also didn't want to kill them. And so they brought them over to my house. So every summer I would have like 9 to 15 killer males, killer genetics. But I got one, right? So, all right. And then anybody who wanted pollen in the group could come over and shake that male and take the pollen and take it home. And it's a community thing. So like maybe your buddy's got a thing, and then maybe this other gal's got this other thing, and it's coming together to share that pollen, and it's fresh, and you don't have to go through the preservation, which really I have never well preserved pollen. So anyway, just when you guys start to pull together, form a male library every summer and just trade that stuff. All right.
Makes a lot of sense, and that I totally feel you, that we're feeling, people here in the community are just realizing that how what a resource you have here, and getting to meet everyone, and see how many people you have to work with, and there's a lot you can do here. So yes.
So then my question is, at what points do you cull, right? Some people wait, they'll run it in 1 gallons and then cull at the end after they've taken all their notes. And then other people are super aggressive, and especially if they're doing a big sift, if they don't go fast enough, they'll cull right off. And it seems like when to cull is kind of like this random thing that their mentor told them, right? So as professional folks, at what stages during the breeding process do you choose to cull during a sift?
I mean, if you're gonna do 10,000 starts, you're gonna probably go a little bit by germination, or by how fast it comes up, and you're gonna test how fast it's growing and everything like that. But I think with smaller batches and getting to know your genetics, I think that it's partly colors. There's a lot of questions that go into developing, a line. So I mean, you might be looking for color in the stalks or color in the seeds, or maybe a thin leaf or a fat leaf. And if you're, doing hybrids or going for thin leaf variations, if you see big fat leaves and you're going for a thin leaf, it might be really easy to identify that in the beginning. But as they grow up and as you start getting into maybe phenotyping it, you can kind of check by the rub of the stalk and everything like that, the trichomes develop on the stalk pretty early. So if you're going for checking for males, takes longer, for testing. So I mean, we do an early kind of germination test on things and see how fast they're growing or well they germinate in our environment. And then as they grow, we start doing it by flavor of the stalk. And then towards the end, it's before we also even kind of do muscle testing and do some kind of, kind of crystal work on it and stuff like that. And I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that, but yeah, I mean, for us, and I'm sure Kevin can, add to it. And again, it's personal. I mean, and some people will be like, I can tell within 2 weeks, exactly what I need. But for us, we do kind of like, there's a lot of rules that get broken within cannabis, and sometimes you never really know till the end what you really, really have, or until you're smoking the joint. So, I wouldn't say that we call everything really early, when we're going. But definitely with males, and it's stature, it's how close the nodes and the branches are growing together. It's once they start going outside or in a windstorm, it's how long are the branches and do they fall over. We really like to know that the branches are going to stay up, and that not having to trellis saves time for us and stuff like that. So the male has to be manly, is what Kelly's saying. So.
Even during that first cycle, you can scout for like disease and pest resistance. Is it prone to different diseases? Yeah. Who knows?
Exactly. That's it gives it a chance. Go ahead.
What you're going to find is most of the time you're going to screw up and throw away the stuff you should have kept. Right. Yeah. Like that's real. It's so real. There's no word for it, because it's like picking an adult from a child. Sometimes it's pretty clear who's going to be phenomenal, and most of the time it's not. And so when you're really doing these sifts on seed stock, if you're trying to make sure you can hold the material so you can subsequently rebreed with it, it's where it kind of helps to have multiple people doing the sift, because then you can hold 100 plants yourself and do the test. You can hold 100 copies through the cycle, and then you can just keep cutting the copies back in size so that they're not, overwhelming your entire operation. But you hold the redundant copies that represent the plants that you're actually sifting, because every time I kept something that was incredible, it sucked the smoke. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. And the ones that I got rid of were incredible. And I said, oh, my God, I didn't see it mature. I didn't have the vision. And someone's like, well, you can see the traits. You can if you're working the line for time. Like if you're working your product over time, you start to see consistent traits, that you start to see a linkage. But if you're working with new material, you have no idea what you're looking at. And so even plants that aren't necessarily awesome as kids, I realized, well, maybe it just didn't have the right starch in the seed to take off at the same pace. So what I'm seeing is a seed that wasn't necessarily complete. And so I'm seeing it compete with seeds that are complete. But once it gets moving, now it's not the same thing anymore. Now it's a juvenile, and it's moving just fine. And so I used to say, all right, all the weak ones gone, all this gone. And what I found was that I was just really going after, vigor and scope, morphological traits, not chemotype traits. And with the advent of lab testing, I started really using lab testing early on all my predicative. So it let me make some clear decisions. Is the stuff that I'm working with for me, which means I could care less about the labs. But if it's for sale, if it's going to move into a market, it has to be within a range of numerics that makes sense. And so I can take a look at all these plants and say, these right here have very little potential for potency whatsoever. And so therefore, I don't want to bring them in my line because I'll drop it. And I've watched breeders take some incredible work and bring 26s down to 13s and then not sell any of it, and then have to go spend a whole nother year bringing the numbers back, because you can't convince people of what they already believe. And so they believe that numbers are real, and you tell them, no, they're not. And they tell you, no, if I crash my car at 70, I'm a lot deader than at 35. And there's just no way to really, $100 is better than $50. It's really hard to say that less numbers are better. Only experience is what provides that. So for me, I could care less what the numerics are. I don't even look at them until I choose my winner, and then I test it. But if I'm in business trying to develop a line that I want to be able to move, or develop a plant that I can share to do something, then I predicatively test it. It lets me find instantly where are my outliers, where are my numerics that I'm seeking, either mixed ratio, 1-to-1s, or I'm going for high THC or high CBD. And then from there, I have to hold those copies back. I mark them. And then I grow them out to fruition, and I hold the copy, because that's the only way I've learned to do it, that the only way you really know what's going to happen is through growing out the plant to fruition and saying, whoa. And like you were talking about pest resistance, what I like to do is spray them down. I like to hose them down at the end of the season. I'll find out which ones are fungally resistant. I'm not looking for nature to do it for me here. I'm going to do it myself with a garden hose and just hose them down and go, you and you and you and you were incredible, and I would have chose you. I wouldn't have chose you, but lo and behold, you're the one, because you're the one that'll actually make it to market. And I don't want to have to use an incredible amount of organic methodology to help me fight the problem. I would rather not. I would rather let the plant fight the problem. And I would rather have it grown dry. I'd rather have the plant in symbiosis with the soil, not with me continuously having to add material on top to protect from problems that I shouldn't have if I did a better genetic selection. So for me, I always go genetics first, because that's where I feel strongest. So I always choose the plant that I know has the least amount of issues, that'll get me to the table. And then from there, we can start to look in those lines for more quality. But I've never picked plants early that really resonated with what I wanted compared to the ones that surprised me at the end of the sift. So we work populations that are small enough that allow you to hold material. And if you can do sifts that are larger in conjunction with multiple people that are competent, you trust them to do a good job, then you're all able to bank the material. One of you might be the bank, where you're the better propagator. You have the ability to hold it. All the plants get tagged, all the cuts get held, one person holds the cuts, the other guys do the sift, out comes the plant. I said earlier, I work with 3 other people as friends. Well, we've been doing this for years, and it lets me constantly come up with killer stuff, because I only have to work one thing a year. And then they can work one thing, and the other person works one thing, and next thing you know, I have 3 brand new plants a year that are killer. That's no small feat. And you can't do it alone, and you don't have to. You just don't have to. You can do it.
And yeah, so knowing what you're looking for, I mean, that's what he's saying is, like, you can do like tissue culture early on, when they're young, if you're going for chemovars and doing something early. So you might be able to grow a ton of seeds. That's where early CBD breeding in the early years was really advanced through tissue culture, which you can do after 2 to 3 weeks of growing a plant. You can kind of find out which way you're of ours, so that can be really helpful in breeding. But if you're breeding for hash, it's going to be really different. You'll never know how it's going to wash at the end of the season, until you wash it at the end of the year. So and then if you're breeding to find a good male, that's going to be probably your biggest limitation, because keeping a bunch of females is kind of what you would do with the big garden, but you can't really keep a ton of males. And then when you're going to keep pollen, there's kind of a situation with males.
I just wanted to say, within the Pure certification, we're working together for collection of varietals right now. So we're doing a whole lot of breeding projects within the collective, and that's pretty exciting. So this will be our first year working that, and there's a whole lot of farmers that are on board. So it's awesome. You can get like 20 years worth of work done in 1 year with a whole lot of people. And that's pretty phenomenal. So another reason to join together breeding. It's important.
Yeah, I've got a question. You kind of hit on it earlier, Kevin. As a small backyard breeder with a small plant count, I've got a couple males, but you keep your males in a veg tent. You have to pluck the balls off of them, keep them in clones so that they don't pollinate the rest of your stuff. It would be nice to save that pollen during the summer in case, because there are always mistakes made in selection, to be able to save that pollen in case you ever have to go backwards because something didn't work out the way you had expected or a mistake happened. What is the best way to save pollen from a male, just, to bank it, and how long will it last?
Man, you freeze it. If you dry it and then preserve it in paper and then put it into, like I use a vacuum container, and I throw a desiccant in there and make sure that there's no moisture inside that package, you can pull it out after a solid year or two and it works fine. I've had good luck with pollen, but I'm not someone that, I have people that have held it forever. But for me personally, a couple years, but I'm somebody that holds the male. Like, I keep pollen in a container so that I can use it conveniently, so I don't have to trigger a male at the right moment. I can say, whoa, you got to kill a female. Can I come over and pollinate it? I don't have to go, hey, let me go get my male and ready, and let's go flower the male, and then you're going to miss the sweet spot, which is in that 2.5 to 4 week period, that initial time when you're starting to throw off the amount of receptor sites you need to pollinate so that you have a long full cycle to get a complete pollination. I need to have the material ready to go. But I can't stand someone saying to me, yeah, I don't have the male, I just got the pollen. And I'm like, and when the pollen's gone, we don't have the male. And I mean, there's a problem because sometimes that male is pretty priceless. So I keep the copy of the male and then pollinate it, collect the pollen, put the pollen in containers, and put it in small enough batches so that you don't have to unfreeze the whole container, because going through that moist and cool, it screws it up. It starts to activate it. And what you... Yeah, the power problems also. But to me, you got to keep the copy. And with the males, if you got a couple males, what you want to be able to do is figure out which one's imparting what traits. And you'll start to figure out, this male seems to do this and this male seems to do that based off of what you're doing. And so you can throw these males at any plant you know well, and you're going to start to take a look at it and say, what does it do to the plant you know well? And you're going to look for consistent traits. And then you'll know this plant decreases the quality of the cultivars I apply it to. This plant seems to increase the quality of the cultivars I apply it to in this way. And then what you now have is you have something that you can hold and use as a known breeder male, so that every time you want to do something, you at least have something that you can use to trap and capture some of these pieces. And you can't hold everything. It's impossible. You end up having a library 300 million plants long. And people say, well, you can put them in vitro. And I'm like, yeah, and every 30 to 45 days, you still got to cull the cell and you got to replenish it. So it isn't like you just stick it in there and you go away for the rest of your life. And then, well, you can put it in cryogenics. And I'm like, yeah, it's not that simple either. It's a problem. And so what you want to be able to do is figure out what are the males you need. So I look for something that's in the gassy line, a male that's going to throw something earthy, males that are working in fruit lines. And then I don't mess around too much in the floral males, because typically they're going to end up being more on, for me, the hazy lines, which are longer flowering, which make it more difficult. So I like haze lines and I like to sift out cultivars, but I usually don't pull males out of them unless you're asking me to, where you want to create some kind of hybrid of heavy equatorial, heavy Mexican Colombian, that we can go into something that's more Paki Afghani Indian and bring it down in compression, but lift up the ethereal effect. And the market doesn't really want that a lot. So I don't put the effort there as much, but we do it occasionally for people that ask.
I also wanted to touch a little bit on just open pollination, and it's a really good idea, if you've got a grandma that lives far away from you and anybody else who grows, set up a male and a female next to each other and let them open pollinate. It's really beautiful, and I've gotten some, a large amount of seeds if you're going for a large amount of seeds, and if you're going for, just open air, and it's a good vibration of that. So we've gotten a lot of really great seed stock by giving it to a neighbor, a great female or a great male that we wanted to keep, and put them in the ground over at their house and set it up in a little garden bed and sort of set up everything that they need to do. And we've gotten some great seed stock out of that. So yet again, using your community, sharing.
And maybe to build on another form of open pollination is if you got some exotic seeds from something, 4 or 5 or 10 or 20, and you really wanted to build that stock up, you can just grow out all the seeds and just keep all the males and all the females. And if you did have someone that doesn't grow weed around and you have like a barn or a way that you can propagate all of them, just let it open pollinate with all the males and all the females in one area. And people always are trying to isolate males and isolate females because that makes all the sense in the world, but sometimes just building unique stock through open pollination of multiple males and multiple females is a really good way to build up those genetics. And then after that you can kind of go for specific breeding and stuff after that.
What he's saying is, and Kel says, it's crucial because what you're doing is you're capturing a huge quantity of diversity within the line. And so for me, there's, and I do that more than I do other selected breeding, is I get a hold of stock I want to play with and I just want to pollinate what I have in front of me so that I can then have a peanut butter jar full of seeds to play with. Otherwise, I don't have any material, and so you have to increase the quantity of material, and the best thing you can do is increase the diversity of the material, because what it does, it gives you the most options for survivability over time, so that you're given every crop a chance to have something that lives through the year. And if I can capture the best plants each season that lived and survived and did well, then that means that year expressed the best year we've had in years. Well, that's awesome. Well, next year was a drought. And the next year was some kind of pestilence. And the next year was some form of viral problem. Then we had a fungal problem. Which plants resisted? Which plants did actually survived and did well enough for you to reproduce? Because that's really what seed reproduction is. It's to hold material that has enough information in it to survive through time. So if you're doing seed reproduction for holding material, it's different than if you're doing directed breeding to create a line for production. What you want is as much diversity as possible. You want you want males that don't look that hot because you don't know what they're going to throw. But what they have is survivability somewhere, and you pull this up. And just like the females, they don't all have to be the most incredible female because you really don't know what that female offers as a progenitor. Until you've bred her, you do not know what comes out of it. And if you look at any kind of animal breeding, it's the same thing. And we're animals. So if you look at us as breeding humans, it's kind of hard if I look at the mom to necessarily say the daughter's going to look just like that. Not always. And you see people that are regular that produce super athletes. And you see people that are average that produce super geniuses. So if you got rid of them out of the population, you would have killed that super athlete and that super genius right out of the population. And that's what you need, is you need to be able to understand that so much of the stuff we're looking for we can't see. And even with scientific breeding practices, we don't have everything marked in cannabis because cannabis has so many traits. And so there's so many inheritable traits that it's not so simple. So when someone says, I use Mendelian methodology in my breeding, I'm like, well, nice. Gregor was breeding for purple and green and tall and short. So that's not that many traits to really sift. And it doesn't work like that with cannabis. And so you had a question a long time ago about stabilizing a line, and we got into it with F1s and we got into it with F2. But when stabilization, it means, what are you stabilizing it for? What is your intention? Are you trying to get a specific chemotype, meaning that it gives you a quality of high? Are you looking for terp profile that is consistent? Are you trying to find survivability for your region where you're in a moist region that has a quick season? Are you looking for size? Are you looking for wind resistance? Are you looking for a plant that opens up larger so you can use less plants so that you're only allowed 6 plants? Well, my 6 plants give me a lot more than your 6 plants. And it's because we're breeding them to open up in size and give us that. So what is your desire? And as you go through this over time, you can start to neck down these decisions and start combining them to where you're starting to get to, 60% give you what you want, and then there's 20 on the left that are horrible and 20 on the right that are supernatural, but the majority of the plants fall within a pretty consistent range. And how long that takes is your ability to ascertain the traits that are coming from the males and females you're using. And if you're doing what you're doing and you're observant and you're able to keep track of what's putting what trait on what, you can start to swing this direction in a lot quicker route. And you have to remember that in the old days, you know, everything was these lines that were stabilized, but they were stabilized to survive. When we think of stabilized lines, we're thinking tomatoes and vegetables of the modern era, where they look the same. But the problem is they sacrificed quality of experience for same. So if you go to the heirloom tomatoes, you go to heirloom vegetables, they're pretty ugly, and they look twisted, and they don't fit into a lug, so they don't fit into that model. But that's where everybody wants to go and breed now, is because that's where the quality of experience is. So, you know, what are you looking for? And so you make that decision, no one else does. And when someone says, hey, you know, I wouldn't breed for that, that's okay, you're not doing it, I am.
One thing I wanted to say too, in addition now with the concentrates and, you know, with all the extraction methods, that just adds a whole other, you know, form of what it is that you're looking for. So if you're sending off your flower to an extractor, then you need to really be in conversation with that extractor. You know, what were the yields? What did that work? You know, also see it all the way through. And that, yet again, is more interaction with community. Because it's interesting, you know, the one that you think that you're breeding for, then your buddy washes it. And it isn't the one that you think that's going to yield as much and have such a beautiful nose at the end. So, you know, communicating that all the way through for how you're going to do your breeding the next time, I think is pretty important as well. And also, you know, oils, it seems to be even oil extraction or lipid extraction or different alcohol extractions. Then if you see it all the way through, sometimes it's not the one that you were breeding for that had the highest potency. It's not necessarily the one that comes off in that alcohol extraction that had the highest potency in flower. That when it starts to translate to the extraction or translate to whatever it is that you're making in your final product, it just, you know, that's the numbers that you want in the end. So it's not only what you're looking for in breeding, but what the final product is looking for.
I'm just going to throw in that real fast. You know what's trippy about, we won't forget you. The friend of mine, Sean, does seed work, and he turns it into concentrate. And what I noticed when I smoked his product was it was extremely balanced. And I was like, wow, it reminds me of old school products that were more balanced, because what it was a reflection of 100 different varietals, similar line, but you got this incredible matrix of cannabinoids that gave you this really killer effect. And it made me realize that's why I liked grass when I was younger, because you were smoking such an assortment of cannabinoids and terps at the same time that it really did balance out. And so the extraction industry is most definitely conducive to working with seed form if you're doing a wash. If you're having to try to get a company to wash it for you or extract it, then they have to go off of efficiency of extraction, and now it changes that desirability. But man, my friend's hash was phenomenal, and I said to him, I just thought, I haven't seen him in a minute since Vancouver, and we were chatting here, and I was like, dude, your product was hella balanced. And he was talking about that fact that because he does his whole crop and puts it all into a common, it gives him that quality. And so that's a really nice factor, because ultimately, as we get into the quality market, that allows you that ability to use from seed, have diversity, pick the flowers that you want that represent what you consider the best flower products, and the rest of it can be washed and combined and homogenated, and it's still killer.
All right, I think that's a perfect segue, talking about pollen. You know, in this area, we're dealing with an agricultural area with a lot of hemp that's going to be coming in here. Not something you guys might have to deal with as much.
No,
but,
we do.
Okay,
we
you do? Okay. So I'm really worried, and as we move towards doing this living soil, how can we prevent that pollen from getting into our stock, ruining our crops? Because we want to be regenerative and be outdoors, you know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, ultimately, you're only as safe as the air that's coming through. I mean, you know, there's plenty of examples out there this year of, you know, CBD growers who are growing their CBD seeds, and THC growers next to them let their pollen go and ruined the CBD seeds that they were working with and added too much THC to the strains, which makes their CBD strains not valuable anymore. So people like to say, oh, it's the hemp breeders that are gonna, ruin the THC stocks, but it can go both ways. So, and they'll call it biological, warfare and stuff, because, it's just like with Monsanto's, famous cases with soybeans and Percy Smizer, where, the pollen went to his seed, but he'd been growing, seed for 50 years, and as soon as the pollen hit his seeds, it was owned by, this other company. So, I mean, ultimately, it's probably one of the big elephants in the room, or the big questions with breeding is that, how do you can't, at one level you can't protect yourself from it. I mean, what I can say is, grow as many trees or wind blocks, around your property as possible, and that can help quite a bit. There's a lot of trees that have a lot of leaves that are really, really good at blocking wind coming through, and you can layer it, maybe 3-4 rows deep all around your plants, and I think that's really smart, because there's other things flying through the air, toxic contaminants and stuff that can also stick on your buds, and potentially fail your test through a pesticide contaminant going through the air. So I think that's part of polyculture, and part of food forests and integrated food forests is just, that environment around you is your best protecting. And, tall trees or the root systems, for water and well systems and stuff like that are also another contaminant to look for. But so when it comes to hemp and knowing how to protect yourself from that, there aren't any classifications right now for hemp, and it's kind of difficult, because if you want to grow medicinal hemp, you're going to want to grow a high CBD hemp, and if you're growing all regular seeds, there's going to be a little variation to that. So it's a desire to maybe go with all clones and grow a whole field of clones. So there's plenty of hemp farmers that are growing a whole field of clones, or a whole field of feminized seeds. As another example why people do that is because they don't want to have a hot plant or a high THC, so they grow all female plants to keep their genetics in line with the hemp requirements. And that can be a reason to do that. But so some people that are growing hemp for medicine are not growing male and female, so they are not a problem for the THC farmers, and you want them in your backyard, because they're just like you. They don't want pollen growing through the air. So I mean, I don't know that there's talk about this, but it might make sense that with hemp farmers, there's classifications for fiber and hemp farmers that, this is a zone where it makes sense to have fiber and hemp, because really we want people that are in the prairies or with 1,000-acre farms to continue to grow hemp where the pollen flies through the air, because hemp seed as a food source is extremely valuable to the human race. Having hemp oil is an amazing oil, totally good for you. The fiber and its ability to grow fiber that can be made into concrete or hempcrete in one season, you can grow houses. That's extremely valuable to me, because I live in the forest where they cut forests down to build houses, and if we could have multiple uses of products going in to build houses, that would be really nice. So I think it's a question that you should really be talking about in your local area and jurisdictions. I know that we're talking about it in our area. I don't know if Humboldt's, there's not a lot of hemp growing in California at the moment because of the classifications, but Oregon, it's really big. So it's also like a potential huge problem. So definitely getting really in touch with your farmers in your local area, like we're doing here. We've already said it a million times, but beyond this group in your local jurisdiction, talking to your neighbors and talking about the responsibility, because we don't really want to totally rely on feminized seeds either, because that's not going to progress our genetics. So there's a level of responsibility that comes to having male and females out there, but it's better for the genetics. So yeah.
Your regulators determine these zones, and so what you really need to do is you have enough data now to say, hey, in these other states, the cannabis crop lost this much value, which means to a regulator tax revenue. So nobody really cares how much money you make or how well you do. It's how much taxes were generated. And the bottom line is if you couldn't generate the tax, so the county's going to make money on you for the county permit and for canopy. But the state's going to make money on you in terms of sales tax. So if you're not selling any cannabis product, they're not generating any money. And so if you can highlight the money problem as the issue to the regulatory board, saying what we need is we need buffer zones. We need places where we can have no hemp and no cannabis crops touching, then what you have is a safety zone. And I got a friend in Colorado that he worked through some huge populations and he discovered a triploid. So he has a triploid non-pollinated plant. You can't pollinate it. It won't accept pollen, will not reproduce because of its chromosome. And so he wants to be able to propagate that and use it in clonal form in places where you have this pollen movement. But we don't have that in cannabis right now, where we suddenly have one outlier plant we can use to solve the riddle. What we need is the ability to do what we're doing and not have the pollen. And I think that because you have multiple states going through this, there's precedent. See, the problem is each state, whoever goes first in life usually gets screwed the hardest, because that's where everybody learns. So whoever was first on anything took the biggest beating. But then it gives precedent. And then the precedent can be used to highlight the problem to the subsequent states. And you don't rely on the regulators to go dig up the precedent. The judges don't dig up the precedent. The jury doesn't dig up the precedent. Your lawyer digs up the precedent and says, hey, this happened before. Here we are now. My case. And that way you can pose a case to your regulatory saying the product that we're producing is in jeopardy from pollination. Can we determine an area around a cannabis zone? Are there cannabis places that we can dedicate appellation zones where we do not have inclusion from these other products? And it's not meant to screw anybody over, but it's you have to agriculturally protect yourselves from this issue, because if you seed it, your extraction value is gone too. So it isn't like you can take seeded, now you're, what are you growing? And I think that the argument has to be in terms of tax revenues, so that the regulatory groups can say, oh, I got you. Let's create zones where we don't have these things touch. What you got?
So growing for extraction, like specific to, like, have you found any inputs or companion plants or anything like that that you use that improve terpene production?
Definitely, we've been taking a lot of research and noticing that with regenerative deep soil practices, terpene levels are going up like significant. Well, I mean, we always say definitely have a percentage of high terpene plants in your soil blends or in your ferments, because it's just a really good idea for microbiology. And it's a good idea in mimicking nature and letting the soil know that you're growing some kind of a floral. It seems to be like an intelligent practice. But as far as like scientific research, we don't have the research on that. But I think that it's a good idea to have multidiversity, you know, within your soil beds, so that it can uptake. And also, you know, creating the ultimate, most amazing soil that you possibly can, so that the plant has the ability to really show its ultimate possibilities. And when you have plants that show its ultimate possibilities, those are the ones that you want to save in breeding. Those are the ones that are like, wow, you're really happy to be here, and I'm breeding you to be here, or maybe in this environment, or, yeah, so.
I would say nettles. Nettles. Yeah.
So
If I had to, just say one thing, nettles. And cannabis itself is, just regenerating. But
One of I would call them like your students, was working with me on my farm, and they did a nettle extract where they fermented it out in the barrels, and then we applied it, and did I measure the numbers at the time? No, but I measured them with my human calibration, where that was some loud shit, and sharper, bitier. So it's an opinion. So I would have to go test them out and then figure out baseline and then that component. But he was like, hey, we know from your classes and through teaching that this is something that worked. And then they applied that to the project. And I saw a change in how the plant, and I knew the plant pretty well, but I didn't test it out to say, hey, what do we have here? But in terms of opinion, I could see it. And so nettle was something that was pretty valuable. It's just that it's you got to wear some heavy gloves when you're breaking that shit up.
Yeah, definitely. Or not, and that's good for you because it is good for you. But.
Another thing that I can say is definitely what is totally ripe and big time happening at that time that you're making a tea. So whatever is the most brilliant and the most healthy and the most vibrant and the most, pungent thing that's happening on your farm or in your area or your zone at that time is what you want to be using in that tea, because it seems to me that that's the most bioavailable at that time. Then you're really working within like seasonal nutrient feeding.
So I've got a question about regional or soil adaptation over generations, because I've heard some great stories about breeding melons in northern Minnesota where melons don't like to grow, and after a few generations of seed saving and crossing, they're getting production. I've kind of seen it myself in my vegetable garden with broccoli and cabbage, because broccoli and cabbage do not like my garden for whatever reason, and the seed I'm saving is now doing so much better than the seed that I am buying. And so when I talk about cannabis, I'm thinking about getting a bunch of landrace strains and just letting them do their thing in my garden. And have you had any experience with maybe bringing in longer flowering plants into your climate, and through adaptation and breeding through successive generations and crossing, are you getting some of those traits in a northern climate where you couldn't get them before?
I mean, that's pretty much all the breeding that we're doing. For sure. So we're bringing in strains from all over the world, and Josh and I travel all over the world, and we go there in these specific locations looking for old varietals, and then we'll grow them out, and then it's always the crazy greenhouse, and we're like, go down to the crazy greenhouse, and that's the the landrace greenhouse, and the crazy things are going on there, and you never know really what to expect, but we'll end up breeding into a plant that really didn't produce much of a flower, but she was so potent, she was so beautiful, so amazing. And then we'll just keep that lineage going because we remember that potent smell that plant had, or an amazing stature that maybe one of them had, or that we were breeding maybe 150 different seeds or females of some Milana cream last year, and it was only one of them out of all of that just finished beautiful and early. I mean, were the flowers nice? No, not necessarily, but she really finished. So we were really excited about that one. So we bred our longtime varietal into her, and that's something that we have always done, and we've really found some really beautiful full range of exactly what Kevin was saying before, of what we're looking for, of what we want to see, or what makes me feel good, or when we wash it in the very end and we look at the hash, like I was saying, it might not be, the one that you think is going to make the most beautiful hash, but it might be the crazy one, and then that's the one that you want to breed with. So yeah, I think that it's just constantly working and playing around with it and having a real a lot of fun with it, and that makes it worth it from year to year.
Depending on your business model, you may or may not have room and time and energy for finding that out, and so it is really valuable when there's someone in your group that has the ability, to have a crazy greenhouse, or to be able to be a seed breeder or whatnot. So that's an asset to a community. The one thing that you'll just run into, because that's going to take, is finding out if it's going to finish or not, and so it not finishing is you losing that seed, so there's going to be that happening to you, so it's going to be partly really hard and all that. So, and it's also really valuable. But that's why we do it in a greenhouse, to kind of get a little bit of an idea. But seeds definitely, will climatize, like you said you saw with your food seeds. Will definitely climatize within 1 to 2 years. So that's why I made a general statement earlier on 7 to 8 cycles and everything like that. But generally after 7 to 8 years, you've gone through enough of the cycles in your area to really make it work. So it is really extremely valuable, and I would encourage it. Any other questions?
Yeah, no, the thing is, some of these things that you're pulling from other places just don't belong where you're growing. So you're going to work really hard to get it to function, and you're going to have to compress the gene pool to find the outliers that work in your range. And it doesn't mean the chemotype's going to come with it. So what you're doing is you're hunting cultivars that fit a region. I need the chemovar to come with it. And the problem is, once I start compressing it, a lot of times I lose it. And so what you can do is you can, like I got some stock from the Reunion Islands. So some of that stuff's like a 24-week flowering cycle. They got plants that go 3 years, almost like a perpetual, like it's a perennial, where you can pick it and it comes back and you pick it. And I mean, people like for years. So some really freaky, weird stuff. But I want to get back into that, take the top of my head off high, that, you know, scares you, makes you look out the window and get a pen out and record license plates like you're being followed. And I want that. And I know, you know. So what I know is I don't expect to necessarily get everything that I would get if I was in the Reunion Islands. But if I can get that population, because I'll take that group of seeds and I'll open pollinate them so I get a bigger collection, then I can go through batches of 100 and find out which ones are workable to a degree that makes sense and have the qualities I want, and then I can use them to hybridize. Because a lot of this stuff, if it's truly equatorial, it's going to require a different angle of inclination of the sun to finish correctly, and we're not going to be able to do that where we're at. We're going to have add supplemental lighting, and then all of a sudden now it's changing it again. And so what I want is stuff that's going to work within a range, and for me, where I'm at, that's like mid-November. Mid-November is about as far as I can go in terms of weather safety. I still, because I'm full south, I still get good sun, and because I'm close enough to the ocean in altitude, I catch it pretty much solid right into mid-November before we basically start to get into too cold, so I'm starting to lose biological activity, and I'm starting to risk real rain, and, you know, big rain. Like you guys get storms, same thing, where all of a sudden we'll have 80-mile-an-hour winds and 5 inches of rain, and your game's over. So I need stuff that's going to work for that. But I always try to chase some of these outlier freak plants. But I realize that I'm not going to get them. Yeah, and I'm not going to get them just to be like, I got Zamal and Humboldt. No, I got a Humboldt version of Zamal. But it's still a Humboldt version of Zamal. So we're moving forward, and then we can hybridize and work and see if we can bring those, you know, ethereal traits into a better chassis. So maybe I can take some chemotype on top of the cultivar and work with it. But some plants just really don't want to be in some of these northern latitudes, because once we get cold, it's over. You can do the greenhouse, but now you're going to have to heat it and you're going to have to light it. And can you afford it? And if it's for your personal use or personal project, then I say go deep. Because I used to love doing, I was telling someone earlier, I used to run hazel lines out to 140, 144 days. And people be like, why? And I said, because I just wanted to see what it was like. I was looking for something, and I also wanted to find out what's it like to run flowering cycles that are 144 days long. And because it's a skill, and it's a development of your skill. And it allows you to refine what you do and start to see the potential. I want to see stuff that triggers as soon as it comes out of the dirt because it had to live close to the, you know, high latitude. I want to see stuff that doesn't finish because it's on the zero. If I understand the big picture, I'll be able to better understand the small. So a lot of times I don't mind chasing things that don't have a real result, because what I'm chasing is skills. And there's nobody that's going to teach you any of this stuff. You have to kind of do it on your own because you're using your location. So unless they're living in your house, at your farm, they really can't teach you what to do there. So you have to kind of figure out, I want to run these things so I can understand, and then what am I seeking? And then you'll be able to figure out, all right, I want explosive growth from these equatorials combined on this type of plant that can finish, that can resist these issues. And it's the hybridization part that really comes into play with some of these exotics. And I had to give up some of my hopes and dreams of running Cambodians and stuff because, well, they want to go into December. And I can't do that. And when California had drought, December was actually a growable month. And everyone said, man, California and Humboldt grows till December. Then the rain came back and everyone found out that there's no growing in December here. So you have to be kind of honest about your potential and what you're doing. And then it lets you realize, all right, I'm just chasing shit because I want to see, or I'm actually chasing something that I can combine to make a value.
And yeah, Lady Sativa and Humboldt has Shashamani Cherry Kush, which is a really amazing cross. So that, if you can marry that, that cross with some kind of an African into a local strain and it works out, that's where I think the real magic is, right there. Yeah. If you're better off in a greenhouse, and that's going to be your safest bet, because there's plenty of examples of pollen going 20 to 40 miles, but that's also in a really probably a hot time of year where the air is really rising and moving up and over forests. But I mean, if your whole property essentially is going to be pollinated if you don't use some kind of a greenhouse. And if that's your goal, then that's really awesome. And now the community should support you and get to know you, and you could be doing a lot of research for people around here. But if you have like a pretty, greenhouse, even the size of this stage or something, with some filters on the outside and the ability to kind of maybe some shade cloth, even if it gets too hot, because you can't really open it too much. You have to have it really well ventilated. But that does allow you to make a lot of seeds in one of those things.
Yeah, you're growing the seed. The flower is secondary in that case. But there was a point about pollination that a friend of mine brought up to me a couple years back, and he cultivated forever, and he's razor sharp. And he was like, man, I'm having pollination issues. And he started talking about how when he was young, pollen would jump up and blow over the mountain and pollinate another farm. And he said, I can't get this shit to jump across a table now. And it made me realize that we hadn't selected for pollination, really. What we've been doing is selecting for clonal. And we're not working with plants that have the ability to dump viable pollen that can move through time. We've really not put that into the genetic information. So with cannabis, a lot of times, our fears of having the pollen move are real, but the reality is a lot of that pollen's not quite as vigorous and viable as it once was. And if you go back to developing plants that you work to create pollen to grow from seed, you'll start to restore that vigor to it. Once that happens, then pollen's blown everywhere. But if you're growing anywhere near anybody else, to me, just be cool about it and seal that shit up. Or you're putting everybody else at risk, and it's not fair to them. And there was old cats in the hills that always ran that crap, and then it would pollinate everybody's crop. You'd be, come on, dude. They're like, no, it's all right. A little bit of seed makes the quality come out. And I can understand that, because that's really how you save material. But in the world of, if I got seeds in my bag, I'm taking it back and I'm blackballing you on the internet, that's not what you want. And so you always got to make sure you're protecting the people around you from pollen spread, and then realize that a lot of plants now really have weak pollen receptors and pollen that leaves, because we don't work the methodology that much. Everything's buffered indoor, and we just don't quite follow the same path of the past. And as you go forward, you'll develop plants that could really throw some pollen and that can throw it over the mountain, and then you'll have to go back to really segregating it completely.
The question is, if everyone didn't hear this, is when it goes to seed, is there a chemical, change within the plant? And I don't know if you want to speak on.
Well, I think that there must be, because I definitely talk to the elders, and a lot of people have asked me, who are now well into their 70s, hey, you got any of that seedy bud? Because I really like the way that stuff smokes, and it brings them back to some place. And I definitely think that terpene profiles and cannabinoid profiles have that capability to bring you back to something. And I don't think that we've done the research on that necessarily, but I think that that's something that is viable, because I've heard from a lot of people. And I even have a friend that grew for 3 of her grandparents, and they all wanted seedy bud. So yeah, that's what her garden was a bunch of seedy bud, and they were really happy about that.
Well, you're not having to form the protective profiles needed to keep the leaves from desiccating, because you're not creating as much biomass. You're creating seed mass. So what you're creating is a different material that doesn't require the same type of protective mechanisms. So you would always see changes, and I try not to smoke seedy pot, because if I get one stuck in the herb and it tastes like it takes me back to the 70s. And I don't know if necessarily I liked that much about it then in that way. So like if you were really good at de-seeding your weed, you were valuable, because you knew how to scrape seeds up an album cover and they come trickling all out. But no, I could definitely see the changes in it, because like I'm not smoking the seeded weed. So when I've already made the decision on what I wanted to pollinate, and if it's preservation, I'm not worrying about it because it's preservation. We'll look for the next piece. But the bottom line is, if you're creating seed mass and you're not creating biomass in vegetative leaf form, then you're going to have less overall cannabinoids formed, and you're going to have less overall terps formed in specific directions, because you're not going to have the same amount of material that you're having to work with to protect, because once you seed it, it doesn't keep stacking. It goes from, I'm now fertilized, and now I'm producing seed. So instantly you see flowers change. They do not keep expanding, looking for pollen, looking for pollen, looking for pollen. I'm dead. They go, I was impregnated, and now they're spears that are tight with far less material on them. So I would see, differences in levels, but also I'm sure that the plant has to produce different terpene compounds in response to being impregnated, so that it can protect the seed. What's going to wear it, what's going to, yeah, and attractions, so that, this is dropped or moved by bird or moved by animal. So is it attracting the animals to eat it now, or is it repelling them now?
And I would even say, beyond, because everyone's always like, oh, we smoke it. But if you're making a tincture out of it, or making an oil out of it, if once the flower goes to seed, you're probably going to get more medicinal compounds out of it, would be my guess. You're probably going to get more of more of a balanced variation to it, and also maybe some unique compounds too. Say goodbye, everybody. Woo!
Always do R&D. Always, always, always do R&D. Because R&D means that you're looking to your future seasons. That means that you're putting out energy for your future projects. That means that you're looking towards your future. It's really important. R&D for your community, R&D for your own farms. So anytime that you have the ability to have separate, buildings that's fully going to keep pollen, safe and kept away, for sure. Filtered, it's important. So if you can, I think that it's always important to have an area that pollen is going to be safe.
Do you guys have recommended equipment or filters that you feel are safe for protecting both your neighbors? Like, we know we have other outdoor growers there, but then
HEPA filters. Yeah, HEPA filter is going to take care of it for sure.
As long as it's big enough, to move a good amount of air. Go ahead.
We had a facility that we started always receiving seeds in this one corner of the building, and the people were like, these plants are intersex, and I'm like, well, if they're intersex, then why are they only intersex when they're in that corner? So it doesn't make any sense. I said, something's going on. And so I went and I took a look, and I found a house down the street, like 2 doors down, that was growing. And because you can always tell when you're a professional grower for your whole life, you can always tell who's got something sparked up. And so I knew these guys were sparked up, and I realized that they must have been doing seed work, and the pollen was just moving because the wind would blow by, and the intakes for the building were right there, and it moved it through those plants first. So we were like, oh my gosh. So we put HEPA filters in that filtration material over all these ducts in the building to prevent the contamination, and it radically changed that situation, because I don't want to stop them from doing what they're doing, because that's not my position. But I can't have you screwing up my operation either. But so it's my responsibility to figure out how to get around it. And yeah, you just got to be able to figure out your flow rates now, though, because you're going to have reduced flow in terms of air volume, and you're going to have reduced efficiency on your exhaust. So just understand it's going to change the flow dynamics, But when it comes to doing seed work, though, you need to keep pollen from the exterior. If you're doing outside work and you're running an indoor, don't let it contaminate. And if you're indoor, don't let it contaminate the outdoor, because I see it, you know.
And also an entry room into your building, so you have, you know, a spot that you can stop and then open up another door. It's, you know, just an easy precaution. In the back.
Yeah, I had a question. You guys brought up, you know, the desirable traits, whether it was on the chemovar or the cultivar, hemp or, you know, marijuana. So, I mean, are we seeing, then you brought up the Monsanto case, are we seeing a regulatory arena coming around, like intellectual property and genetic patenting or anything like that? And if so, what's your, Kevin, what's your forecast on how the U.S. is going to move towards that? We see it in Canada right now. Health Canada is allowing specific cultivars to trade or patent their genomics. How is it going to play out here in the U.S.?
It's already here.
It's already here. Yeah, yeah.
It's already
Yeah, I mean, you know, we were talking about that with Beth at the Open Cannabis Project, has been part of this tour. She's not here right now, but, you know, look into the Open Cannabis Project, who are some of the people who are working with genomics and IP, and it's a big topic among all of us farmers right now, because it's how do you protect your you know, ability to make strains, and then do you want to patent it? And that's the big fear with federal legalization, is that it's going to allow potential gene editing and strain editing, and gene and markers that they can put markers in your genes. I've been told that it doesn't take much of a variation off of that for it to be your own genetics. So it is really hard to own a plant. So I don't think we don't necessarily need to run out and patent all of our things, because it doesn't necessarily protect you in the end. But it is something to really look into right now. And right now, there aren't any federal cases in the U.S. where people are able to use genetically modified strains, but we know that they're out there, and we know in other countries they're starting to grow it. It's also been something that farmers have been nervous of, because when you start taking your material and giving it to people to get a genomic sequence, are you giving up your IP just in the act of learning the information? So it's a really good conversation to continue having. We're having conversations within our group about, you know, with lawyers and looking and moving forward, and there's different countries are going to have different rules on it, and it's going to be, you know, a big marketing game, and there's plenty of people out there that are, you know, using those games to their profit. But, you know, plants all came from one place and they're going to another. So to me, it doesn't make sense to patent something, because really you're just patenting like a moment in time. It's not, you didn't patent like all the generations that it took to get to you, and then 1 second after you have it and it goes into something else, it's no longer what you had. So I would think that's our personal like argument or take on it.
And I really, you know, I always say this, I really think that the cannabis plant's going to have the last laugh. She's incredibly adaptogenic. You know, she can't be treated like any other plants. I believe that, you know, a lot of patenting companies and a lot of patenting lawyers and a lot of big patenting institutions have had tremendous success in patenting other plants. And I believe that they're going to have a lot less than that with this plant.
They have utility patents, which are broad. They cover some characteristics. And I think there's maybe, I think Bacchus Group might have like 14 utility patents out. And so these you have to be aware of, because you're going to start to find out that some of the stuff that you want to work has already been locked up. And I talked to the legal group the other day that just patented Bubba Kush. Now, I'm going to go talk to these guys in depth, like in conversation, because I'm kind of curious as how the hell did you patent Bubba Kush? And I'm just curious, how'd that happen? How'd you do this? And they'll explain it, because it's already been done, so it isn't like it's gonna slow the process down. But someone had it done, and I met the legal team that did it. The utility patents are tough because, yes, you can challenge them in court, and people say, well, they don't hold up. Yeah, and that's in the U.S. But you have to actually challenge this patent, and that means you have to hire attorneys to challenge these people. And how many of you have the money? And so I'm kind of the opinion where what you're trying to do is at least create something unique to your region, and then methodologies in your region where you can have some patent on the process, some control over the cultivar, so that you don't lose the ability to run varietals that work in your region. And that's why you have to form these groups that allow you financial combination so that you can smack this guy right in the mouth the same way you're getting smacked, which is with money. And there's no other way to do this, because the people that are coming in see a smorgasbord of money by owning your material. And if you suddenly find that none of the material you're working with, you have the ability to actually sell without paying somebody, and their surcharge is more than the margin of profit, well, you just went out of business quickly. And so because cannabis is so unbelievably complex, any little deviation from the norm of what they have can actually be another patent. But the point is, if they have your material and they can prove it, you have an issue. And so what you have to start to take a look at is, through plant patent attorneys, which plants have been patented, which broad spectrum patents, utility patents have been applied for and are in operation. And it'll start to let you know that that's not where you want to go play, because you're going in the wrong route. And to me, it's an abomination for our industry, because when you start to control the genomic form like that, you start to instantly compress the plant, and it's criminal, because what you're doing is you're removing the diversity of a gene pool, and you are wiping out, centuries, millennia of evolution. And the fact of the matter is, to me, with CRISPR tech, what trips me out is that CRISPR tech is gene editing, and it works really well for some very specific stuff, but on complex plants, it's far more complicated. And when you change a gene, you drag other genes forward with it in a gene linkage. And the problem that I have more than anything is that I've been smoking cannabis for over 40 years. And I mean, I smoked a lot of cannabis. And I don't have any lung problems. I'm a good endurance athlete. And when I go to the hospital and get my examinations, I always laugh too, because they always tell me about the health of my lung. And they're like, my God, your lungs are unreal. And I laugh, because if I ever told them how much herb I smoked, they'd fall over and die. So I know that for me, in my example, I haven't had any lung issues, 40 years of consuming cannabis. And my fear is that when you get into CRISPR tech and you start to manipulate genes, do you change things you're not aware of with the linkage drag? And do you take away the carcinogenic resistance? Now, all of a sudden, cannabis is a carcinogen, like tobacco, because something in the genealogical form is preventing us from catching it, using it, and it actually helps you fight cancer that you've caught from other things. So if you remove that, then what have you done? You've taken away the holistic power of an unbelievable universal medicine. And to me, that's scary, because once you get that edited plant into the system and it starts to move through the line, which it will, every time you do a salmon, it escapes. Anytime you do any plant weird, it escapes. And we know this through our history, that this has never worked well. And when you start to do it with cannabis, which isn't just this product we use for recreation, but it's an unbelievable medicine. And I used to not believe that. I used to only see it as drug. And I was cool with that. I had no issues with that at all. But when I got into medical cannabis, I couldn't believe what I saw, because I got to see so many different ailments really, really affected positively from cannabis use. And it blew my mind how many people benefited, and to the degree they benefited, and how simple it was to benefit. And it changed me as a person. I became very much more connected to people because of it. And I became way more of a medical advocate than I'd ever been prior, because I realized that this incredible holistic medicine, if we manipulated it with our lack of knowledge, then we would change something that was absolutely supernatural in its potential to take people to another level in terms of health and wellness. And yeah, cannabis superfood. And I don't think that I'm qualified to push that forward in that direction. I'm not. What I want to do is just work with this existing, and I want to preserve material so that we have these tools so that down the road when we're more intelligent, we know how to mine into them and use them in all these different ways that we don't know now. But when you start to get these guys in the labs and they're going to start messing around and they're going to pull out some incredible stuff that has unbelievable growth rates, phenomenal profiles, exceptional resistance. You're going to see that stuff in real production by these massive companies. If that stuff gets into your world, then all of a sudden now you have mix. And that's why I always tell people, preserve your seed stock, put it away, stash your shit. Trust me, in the future, you wish you had. Because what you'll have is material that's unpolluted. And if you look at South America, you can't really even find much material that isn't polluted with Dutch genetics. And they don't, yeah, same thing. All these places that had incredible stock that had been selected for spiritual usage, gone. And we don't have any of that material unless someone's held it someplace else in little tiny micro pockets. And all those people that held it are getting older, and they're going to die, and they're going to die with their material. So you got to watch out. It's kind of like when you get Teflon and polar bears, kind of lets you go, well, they're not cooking on a plate. So the movement of things around the world are really pretty spread. And I'd say that most of the regions that produced what we would call land-raised cannabis that had been sitting for a couple hundred years, every one of those regions, if it's in Southeast Asia, war. If it's in South America, Central America, Mexico, cocaine. If it's in, or war, civil unrest. If it's in Asia, heading towards Russia, they cut that out through communism, where they burn it with flamethrowers. You get into Malaysia, those areas, any of that grass, they catch you, they kill you. So you're not seeing huge concentrations through religion.
And that might be a spot to find good land races in some zones where it's trapped. Yeah.
Pakistan, Afghanistan, war and opium. Lebanon, Morocco, same thing. You look at Morocco, where it's this massive hash region, they're just going off on Dutch genetics. And so, you know, a lot of companies have. I mean, I know guys that sell seed to them. But the point of the matter is that you're holding probably some of the best material available because you've been rolling it around for a long time in your regions. And that's why you want to connect with these older cats that said, listen, I don't care what's on, what is that internet thing? I just want to grow good grass. And what they've done is they've got cannabis that's worked over time in a place and stabilized. And so in a sense, it is land race, because we've destroyed the stability so much in so many places that how do you define land race now?
And there's still good genetics out of Africa. You know, the Congolese is something, you know, people really love the Congolese, and the Malawi could potentially have, you know, more THCV, and the Swazi, and you know, there's a lot of regions that people are still looking for good genetics.
And I just wanted to touch back on patenting. Something to talk about is that patenting a finished product is something, you know, you really want to look into, and we are really telling people over and over again during this weekend to create products, finished products, you know, whether it be with your community, whether it be on your own farm, you know, that's part of your branding and having a product, and that sort of stuff can be patented, and that will give a little bit more protection. But again, you know, the patent process is really a game of how much money you have. I mean, yet again, it's coming back to community. We're in the inception of this industry right now, and of course, there's been a whole lot of work on clinical trials with specific strains, clinical trials with specific cannabinoids, you know, the isolation of specific cannabinoids or terpenes and the terpene ratios. But we're so in the inception of this industry that we don't know a lot about this plant. She really hasn't allowed us to know a whole lot. So that's why I can't encourage you all more to collect that data. that data needs to be collected. That's what we're talking about within our collective and within the peer certification, is the collection of this data. And we need to take that really seriously, because that's going to be the responsibility of the cannabis culture to bring that forward. I don't really believe that's going to be the responsibility or the rightful responsibility of the pharmaceutical industry to bring that information forward. So if we want to have claims on that, and we want to have, the original data, I know we've been breeding for specific medical issues and maladies for, 25 years. And I think that that's really important, and that's a cultural thing. So in order to bring that forward, and in order to gain access to that, we're going to have to do that ourselves.
I would like to also point out the Caladrius network. They're a network in California. Forrest Hurd is a really amazing person. Forrest Hurd and the Caladrius network in California has been working with children and Wade Laughter from the House of Harlequin. They've been doing a lot of work with kids and children with ailments and families that don't have anywhere else to go, and they have a tremendous amount of clinical studies based off the families that they support, and on milligrams and dosage amounts and stuff. So. And definitely with strains and varieties and stuff. So we really love the Caladrius network, and ICCI and different places that are institutions in the world do have a lot of, not necessarily strain specific, because the hard thing is with strains is they're not stable, so you can't really say what a strain does, and that's what's been proven through the studies, is that you can't say that, say, a Bubba Kush, grown and doesn't have like the same clinical study, or the chemotypes, chemical compounds that it would if you take it in a desert area or a thing. So and then at that point it becomes more about the compound itself, and there are a lot of studies about what compounds do in the body, but I think there's so many different kinds of dispositions within people that changes within each person and stuff. So that's what I love about the cannabis medicine is adaptogenic, but I like to think of it as it's a fractal medicine. It's got a fractal of impossibilities of what it can do, from the grow matrix to the body matrix, and then to the ethereal matrix with our emotions and everything. So, and I really love that about it, because it's kind of like with fungi. There's really no rules. There's just sort of guidelines to the whole thing. But definitely looking towards networks. WAM, Valerie Corral down in California has been working with people. WAMM is another amazing network of people that have been helping patients for a really, really long time. And those are the people to really look at, or some of the really early compassion clubs, the Berkeley Compassion Group and stuff like that have a tremendous amount of information. And those are the people that we really look to.
And I was just saying, and even those organizations that have been working really strongly since the late 80s are just now starting to collect all of their data and get it together and realize that their data collection is important for the future of the cannabis plant.
You know what? I think what made me see medical cannabis really clearly was I had a plant that I used for myself because I like to smoke it, and we had people coming into the compassion program, and there was no herb that day left for the people that came in. We already given up what was there. So this guy rolled in a wheelchair, and he's like, "Oh man, I could use some grass." And I was like, "Hey, well, I got some of my own pot in my backpack. I'll just give it to you." So I give him this weed, and he comes back the next day, and he said, "Man, what was that?" He said, it took care of my spasticity. And I said, "Well, it was some of my private pot." I said, "I'll give you another bag. Let's see if it works again." And it worked again. So then he and I started to figure, well, maybe we found something here. Maybe it's in chemotyping. Maybe it's in terp profiles. So we tried to find as many things that was similar to that as possible, and none of them worked. And so I said, wow, that's pretty interesting. So I started taking that plant, and I started giving it to every single person that I was dealing with that had spasticity, some type of shaking, tremors, neurological issues. It didn't make a difference what it was. If your body jerked and shivered, that's what we would give you. That was the LA Pure Kush. And I really liked it because it was just A+ flower. I mean, rip you in half when you smoke it. And I couldn't believe what it was doing for these people. And so I talked about it, and the next thing I know, I got people flying to me from other parts of the country with these incredible problems that were spasticity related. And because we grew a lot of it, my crew grew a lot of it in general too, I could always access a bag. So when people flew in and they came to me, I could go get them a bag of the pot, and then they could try it, and then I would give them a clone, so they would be empowered to deal with their own issue. And it got to the point where when I went over to Germany, I had the scientists from the Belgian government come and meet me, and they wanted to talk about it because they were fascinated that it had worked across so many different issues. But no matter how much we took that plant and bred it or selfed it, it wasn't the same. It's that plant seemed to have an ability to work on a specific problem across an incredibly wide range of issues. And when someone asked me what's the one plant that I'd keep, it'd be that one. And it's because I love to smoke it, but it's because to me it has an ability that's unbelievable for a very specific thing. And I like that about medical cannabis in that respect, because for a lot of people you're hunting to find the magic combination. This plant seemed to have that combination for a specific issue. And it was the first time I had seen that. And I was involved in all the early CBD development. So I mean, I got to see CBD born in America, and I got to be somebody who helped drive it through the system. But the Pure Kush is what really made me see medical cannabis differently, because it worked across the board on so many people. But no matter what we did, we couldn't get the results to come out, no matter how we tweaked and messed with the plant. So it's one of those things where when you're talking about your medical benefits and is there a database, there's tons of them. I go online all the time, pull up databases. This does this does that. Well, it did it for you. But did it do it for you, or was because you changed your diet at the same time? Did it do it for you, or did your stress level decrease because of placebo effect, which is pretty real? And did that do it? Did the cannabis relax you, which lets your immune system back up, and did that fix it? You don't really know. And so the problem is we haven't had enough ability to do actual scientific testing to double-blind prove the hypothesis, so that you can say, and when that happens, we'll lose that ability to even distribute the plant, because now it's worth a lot of money. And so, for me, what I did is I made that plant available for a long time, so I put it in a lot of people's hands. So if you were ill, you had the plant, and I just told you, hang on to the damn thing, because this is what you're going to use. And it made radical changes in people. I mean, I was watching people, I had people come to me that were dying of hiccuping. I didn't know that was a problem. And I met a gentleman who had to drink a substance that made him vomit. And when he vomited, he said, okay, I got 15 minutes to talk before I start to hiccup again. And he was a very successful individual, very bright guy. He had hiccuped himself into poverty and was dying from hiccuping, and his body was shutting down from perpetually hiccuping. And it was trippy to see it, and to watch him drink a substance and vomit and then talk, and then 20 minutes later do it again so that he could continue talking, because otherwise he could not speak. And I was like, what is, and he looked like shit. And I was like, this guy's going to die. So I got a hold of my buddy, and we got him a sack, and he had friends, and I gave him the plants, and he went back to where he's from. He came back and saw me in a year, and I couldn't recognize him. I didn't know it was the same guy. And he had looked like he had 15 years had come off his life. He was healthy and normal, and now he was this unbelievable advocate of medical cannabis, and he was taking that material that I had given him, and he was pushing it into people that had similar problems, because now he was aware of these issues. And I think that's what you have to do with some of this stuff, is you have to grassroots it in the most simple way, where you discover something that has an incredible value, and you try not to monopolize the value, and you move it into the community to benefit from. And the problem is everybody's like, yeah, but that's where all the money is. But the problem is that when you go after the money like that with holistic medicine, you completely cut out the people who need it the most. And that was where CBD came into America, where it really came into the U.S. Wade distributed his products to people. I kicked out as much CBD material as anyone in human history. And Lawrence was a phenomenal advocate too. And Lawrence Lawrence was even deeper than I was in the sense that Lawrence was making medicine from the CBD material he was working with and then using that material to help people. I had the ability to propagate tremendous amounts of material, and because we controlled the material, we were able to drive it into the system, and no one could figure out how to make money with CBD back in the day. If you can believe that, it was worthless and no one knew what to do with it. They didn't even know what it was. And I saw what it did, and I wanted to see it move through the system, and I knew the only way that that would happen is if we gave it to you for free, and we allowed you to then propagate it and to create your own like recovery groups, so that way what people would do is they would work together to holistically solve their problems. And then I knew the genomic form would be available all over the place, so they wouldn't just be able to stomp this out when it was convenient, and people wouldn't need anybody to help them. They'd have the tools. Well, and because of that, we don't really have the database, because I'm not making, because someone said, in order for you to do this, Kev, you should have made them fill out a form, you should have made them give this thing. And I'm like, when you're trying to help people that are in desperate need, you don't need to make it any harder. And so a lot of the data got lost because it was not asked for. And so a lot of the databases that I see pop up, I kind of question where you're getting the information from. And I question what was the standardization of the testing that said this works. What I use is from dealing with people directly. And it makes it easy for me because I can say, look, I saw this do this 300 times over the last 8 years. And it just seems to be these things work. And no, I don't know why, and no one else does either, and we can't quite understand what's taken place, but we can say in general, these things seem to work for these purposes. And when you came to me and talked to me at the Emerald Cup, it blew my mind because I know that you have all these properties in cannabis that reduce the issues you had, but you're the first person I met that used it and had that change, where you used it to alleviate a problem, and you were like, man, this is what I found, this is what worked, and it blew my mind because you, in your desire to heal, went and looked, and from it, and you did research. You said, hey, these things are in these things. If I do this, I might have a chance, because you didn't want to be crippled primarily. And so you said, I'm going to go and do my own research. I'm going to do my own R&D on me. And so you're your own guinea pig, except that you found a way through. And so really you're the one of the people that can create this list you're talking about I'm somebody who used products to alleviate this issue. And with the number of people who have the same problem you do, that's huge. And that's why, like with me, with the spasticity, the number of people I saw that had damage and nerve damage that made them jerking around out of control, I was like, whoa, we can say that Pure Kush does that. You can say that Royal Kush helped you there. And now we have 2 varietals that we know worked. And then if you can now take that and apply it to someone else and they have similar effects, now we can start to say, wait a second, it's not just your chemistry it's working on, it's on others' chemistry. That's why I can say Pure Kush works unbelievably well, because if you had any tremors of any form, you became my guinea pig. And I'd say, hey, can I give you some free pot so you could test it, so we can find out if it works? And people, if they understand what you're trying to do, which is help them, they're down. They will do the R&D with you. And so you're the first person I know that used cannabis in that form, that had measurable results, that you said, hey, I chose it for this purpose, it worked, here I am, improved. And you radically improved. Like, there's no difference, man. You absolutely look like a healthier version of yourself that I met. Oh, there's no question. I mean, I'm not from the medical world, so like when I see people ill, I still look at them like, whoa, like that's real. And it's genuine because I'm not from that world. I'm from the hustler world who got into medical cannabis, and that's what kind of really let me have success, was that I wasn't immune to the grief. I tripped out. I was like, whoa, I had no idea people were this jacked up. And I didn't realize how many people were using cannabis in these methods because they weren't revealing it to me in their private lives. And I'm not really a probing kind of guy where I'm not like, hey, tell me about your personal life and what you use to do your thing. So, I'm not getting that info. But when I started to see it in real time, I was like, my God, this is unbelievable. And when you see people change dramatically like that, there's no question it's real. And then what you do now is you become an advocate for that direction, and then other people can then utilize your information to say, whoa, if I'm having Lyme disease, could I then try this similar situation? Would it work for me? And if it does for a number of people, then man, you're the starting data point that begins this study. But when you hand this test over to medical professionals to do, they need to get paid for their work. And they're going to get paid by taking it over, patenting the material, patenting the process, and now you're paying 40 grand for Epidiolex. So you're for real, you're paying an incredible sum of money for a product that doesn't work because it's not derived correctly, and it basically drives people up in this incredible hope, but it lets them down in their reality of the treatment. And I don't try to pretend to be a doctor because I'm not, and I don't diminish MD work because you have to be a very intelligent individual to chase that degree. Your understanding of a thing is deep, but it's also financially driven to recoup the time. And that's why, to me, when it comes to medical cannabis, I think it's always best to share it with the community, holistically move it. And whenever I did all the CBD groups, I would say, listen, I said, I'll help you out. I even funded a lot of them. Your requirement is that you provide extra to other people like yourselves. And you make it available, and you treat them nicely like you were treated, because I didn't get a damn thing from helping you. So therefore, you owe someone else. You don't owe me, but you owe someone else. And I made you carry that debt forward. And it allowed there to be this incredible movement of a thing, which then resonates through the world today. And I know that any one of you that has success with a thing holistically and then can state it and then can get others to try it, because when you're desperate, you'll eat sawdust. You'll do anything at that moment. And if you try it and it works, and then it actually starts to bring your condition to another degree of lessens it, all of a sudden your life is changed and you're back to having a life that you can function in. You're the most powerful advocate in the room because you're talking from experience. And if you had, and I just like with all the cancer issues, people come in and you help them with tumor reduction, and the oncologist calls you up and says, hey, can we talk to you? Because the people that dealt with us that had serious cancer and tumors, and they don't have them anymore. And we're kind of curious as to, they said, this is what they did. Can you explain to us? So when I go to see doctors, I get asked about cannabis more than I talk to them. Like, they're not asking me about anything other than, can you explain to us cannabis medicine? And I trip out because I'm like, I'm not that guy. But we know more than most of them do by far.
Yeah, if anyone didn't hear that, he was just saying that there's just a powerful union that happens with growing, and there's just probably no doubt that the plant's being able to express its ultimate abilities through that interaction. And I totally agree with you on that. And that's a real focus that we keep in our garden, is to be in our garden and to not think of it as a monetary source. Just think about it as a grateful interaction that we're being able to have. And money is a beautiful, representation of that relationship and everything. So it's really important to us to keep that in our minds when we're in our gardens for the day, or the year, for the life.
Well, when you're trademarking, you're just sort of saying this is the name of the strain, and then some other guy can get it and then name it something else. So you're really not protected necessarily in a trademark, but a trademark may be able to take you pretty far if your branding is already taking you far, like cookies or the Gorilla Glue. They're trademarked right now. Whether they have genetic markers or not, I don't know. I have heard some interesting information through the community that I can't speak on because I just don't know. But that's where cannabis is so tricky. That's why really having these conversations is sort of a joke, because we don't know. We can give you our, see, they know. That's what I'm saying. They know. It's a joke. That's her last laugh. But that's the truth. So we can be as heady as we want, but this plant continues to show us that she can't be controlled in the way that past standardization with plants has worked, and other plants have been able to be controlled, but this just doesn't seem to be one that anyone can put their thumb on.
Stress-induced, so the plant senses this change and it goes into flowering. So you bring a male and it's you've already brought it into male, you know what it is, and now you're trying to recover it. And what you need to do is you need to realize that you probably have root ball stress, because you're talking about your indoor work, right? And so what I found is that with a lot of this stuff, when I'm trying to re-veg material, and I do a lot of re-veg because people hit me up and say, bro, I got this killer varietal and I didn't keep a copy. So I go dig it up out of someone's garden, or I go to someone's spot and chop it and bring it back. But what I always do is I take that varietal and I trim back some of the body on it so I have less vegetative material. And then I trim back a subsequent amount of root zone material so that I'm balancing out the amount of production up and down. And then I can put it into a larger size pot so that what I have is no root stress, because the root exudate, this is my opinion, but the root exudates start to tell this plant that you're not flushing out the waste products. And the plant starts to say, well, if I'm not flushing it out, I'm under stress. And so you see the male continue to keep putting out sexual organs. And then they'll open up in a room. And so if you can cut it back and then open up the bottom end, with re-vegging any material, you have to really go, and I don't like 24-hour light cycles, but you have to for re-veg, because you have to make sure that hormonally this plant never believes for a second that it's going to go backwards. And so revegetating a plant is a stress in itself. And I don't like to do it, but I do it a lot because it's the only way to recover stock sometimes. So I don't do it for material that I do. If I'm doing a sift, I keep a copy, because I don't want to have to go through this. Because for me, I've seen plants take almost 6 months to re-veg. They just freeze because they're determinate. Once they set in motion, they do not want to come back. And then other plants come back easily, and I would say stuff that's more equatorial comes back quick. And the more latitudes and where the plant was sourced, the more determinate it is in its direction. But with the males, I want to make sure that even with the females, I thin down the top, but I leave enough material. I thin down the bottom, and I leave enough root. I put it into fresh material, and then I sit it under 24-hour light, and I leave it alone. And I let it kind of stabilize, and now I can start to grow new material. I can then cut clones from that juvenile material, and now I have material that has the lowest amount of stress hormone present in the tissue, and then I can go from there. But once you've triggered a male, he doesn't want to seem to stop triggering. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, once he goes, he just keeps going. And just like a guy, you know, stubborn. I do like the probiotic box. I like the earth box because the sub-irrigation and the streptomyces, the plant thinks it's in a more natural environment, and it thinks that it's in a bigger pot than it is because of the way you're having a much more even wet-dry cycle. And so those tools are excellent for that. Sometimes you can't use one of those pots if it's an outdoor plant because it's big. And so if it's big like that, I'll put it in a pot and I'll lay it sideways because it might be too big to fit in a room. But you don't care. Just lay it on the floor and put it in a pot and bend it and let the shoots grow up, because they're going to be positive phototropic. So they're going to move towards light and away from gravity. And you'll be able to start vegetating that material. But the earth boxes are incredible for recovering material, recovering dudding, and recovering plants that I want to have stabilized from stress, so I can cut the juvenile material off so that I can then cull that plant and then go back to fresh.
And even if FPJ, a fermented plant juice, something in, high nitrogen, kind of maybe an algae or a spirulina water or something would be a really good source to kind of trigger new growth as well.
So I got a question that's probably going to end up being for Kelly, but a lot of people consider biodynamics spring, and I'm just learning about it, trying to learn for myself and make that judgment. But I saw some really good presentations at Emerald Cup around it.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to know some of the biodynamic ramifications when it comes to breeding. I don't even know what to ask you they are, but I bet you know what to say.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that there's any ramifications to it. I mean, there's, the biodynamics is a really beautiful spiritual practice, so it puts you in touch with the moon, which is going to help your breeding. It's going to put you in touch with maybe some, celestial properties and even crystalline energy. Water, we didn't get into the flow forms, but water and structuring water is part of biodynamics, which is going to be really good for breeding. I mean, and you'd be safe to say that if it was biodynamically bred, that it's even better than any other any other breeding.
I highly suggest that people learn planting calendars and moon calendars and the astrology signs of what happens with the moon and its waning and waxing phases. It's not that difficult, and using it because there definitely is a height of hormones during a certain type of moon and a certain waxing time of the moon, and depending on what kind of breeding that you're even going for is something that's interesting too. So you could go down the deep rabbit holes, but just to learn about real basics of what to do with your plants at what certain times of the moon cycle, it's really easy, and I really encourage you all to check it out. I'll get back to you all on that. Maybe hit us up, and I'll do some research on maybe what would be the easiest, because we have a couple of moon calendars that we just look at all the time. But I'd love to give you a good resource on a good education, because I don't really know how I learned. I just think it was all through my women friends and planting, and then looking at lots of different books and different publications, and it's just something that I've taken on. So I can't really tell you a single source, but we'll get back on that.
Stella Natura biodynamic planting calendar, a lot of people, use and like a lot. I mean, there's tons of books on biodynamics and.
Yeah, but as far as planting on the moon and breeding.
The nerve problems in terms of spasticity with that LA Pure Kush cut, and then the Lyme's disease was he was using Royal Kush lines, but he wasn't using it out of a cut form. He was actually sourcing it from seed from Ben from Emerald Mountain. So he picked, is that right? Yeah, so he wasn't a single cutting. He was able to pull it, so which is actually a better thing than what I had, because mine is a single cutting. He found it through seed line. So perhaps that in that line there's a property. In my case, it was only in a single cultivar.
There's a lot of information about neem going around, and I guess, is that specifically having to do with genetics? I guess we don't know. Neem oil is something that is used a lot in gardens for, pest management, obviously, and it's something that can affect, well, it can be a problem if you're getting into neem derivatives with azadirachtin, and there's areas where you can fail tests from, having too concentrated of forms of it. It also can be used and washed into your soil and potentially throw off the soil balance in your soil life. People use neem cake in their soils in there, and so that can also be maybe good for some of your pests, but also maybe affect your soil biology in a negative way. As far as how it would affect your seeds, I think that, if you're having to use neem, you're probably in an imbalanced situation. So it could affect the way that the seeds are growing, because the seeds, are going to be growing in the flower that has the oil on it, and it could potentially affect the seed coating, and then, set it up for the next generation to be compromised in the initial sprout.
I just think that it's incredibly important then when using any type of volatile, oily plant, be very careful in the amounts that you're using, because it kills microbiology, and then when it kills microbiology, then you can throw off your whole system. So I think in order to answer that question and keep it in a way that could be sort of across the board with any over volatile oil plant use or pesticidal use, I think you have to be incredibly careful. And I think that it's something that in this industry, it was like neem was the catchword for a while. And then we started doing some studies and some soil tests and realizing that that volatile, the large amount of volatile oils were in fact throwing off microbiology. But that only really makes sense when you study herbology or when you study a lot of, biodynamic gardening or just really basic gardening practices to keep your soils free of those heavy oils. Because whenever you do anything in a water sign, then that means it's easy flow. You're looking, when you're cutting a clone, you're cutting it, there's some kind of an opening, and you're looking for an easy flow of roots down. You're not really wanting a flower out of that. You're wanting ultimate growth. So whenever you do anything in a water sign, which is your Scorpio, your Cancer, or your Pisces moon signs, then you're going to get easy free flow, and you'll definitely find that those roots are going to pop tremendously faster than if you were to go on Earth, or an Earth sign. Well, Earth would be the second best sign if you had to cut on. But any fire or air sign is just really not that great. And we've done all kinds of tests and really trying to challenge it on different waning and waxing signs. And when you do it on the right sign, it really makes sense. And it's good to just mark it out. And once you start, the beautiful thing about biodynamics and understanding moon signs and moon calendars, and it really wasn't even, well, I won't even go into that, but it's just when you start realizing where it is in the calendar, then it's almost like a natural flow of what you need to do. You'll wake up in the morning and be like, you know what, today I've got to clone those plants. Okay, let's look at the moon sign. Will that work? Bam, it's always the right one. So you just start getting on that flow, and it almost teaches you, how to be better at it.
And I think that, in our ancestry, we were, eating more in our environment. We were eating more what was blooming at the time. We were eating more that was nomadically, we were going towards. And I think that's because evolution inside of our body understands, that we're able to process things in a certain way and at a certain time. So, paying attention to the natural cycles really helps you. You can even prune things to not grow fast, and that might be beneficial to you at one point. So there's, cutting it on an air sign or a fire sign is gonna not give you, big growth. So there might be, reasons to do it for the opposite as well. So, that's just a good thing to know. Excellent. Well, we could answer any more questions later on too. We can go smoke some ganja now.
Hey, thank you guys so much for taking the time, and thank you. Thank you. Good job, brother. Hey, man, it's been good to be on the panel. You too, baby, too.
Give thanks for Kevin and all the love that he brings to the group, and Josh and everyone.
Thank you guys for coming. Seriously, look, you guys all here to the end, and thank you so much for making this happen. Serious. We just did the organization, but you guys paid the money to make it all happen. So
and we're
really appreciate it.
And we're all really impressed with what we saw here, and what everyone's doing has been really amazing. And we've been a lot of places, so we can, you guys filling this room up with a lot of really good weed and a lot of good family has been really fun for us to check out. And really want to thank Tony at Grow Gear here and stuff, and he's been an amazing host, and I can see that he's really catering to the community here and really giving everyone what they need. So thank you for that. Thanks, everyone.